We're now looking at the Gemara on Daf Ayin Tes Amid Beis after the Mishnah. It's about halfway through the Yom. The Gemara asks, how could Rabbi Akiva and our Mishnah say that a Sris Adam Choletz Michdi Shamina Rabbi Akiva Diyomer Chayve Lavim Ke Chayve Krisus Dom. And Chayve Krisus La B'nei Chalitza V'Yibam Din. Why does Rabbi Akiva, in the case of a Sris Adam, require Chalitza? After all, a Sris Adam is Chayve Lavin, which, according to Rabbi Akiva, are equal to Chayve Krisus. And in Chayve Krisus, there's no Chalitza or Yibum. There's no Nefila for Yibum. So why did Rabbi Akiva say the Sris Cham is Choletz? The Sris is also Bisalav to a Daka, and there's no Chiyuv Yibum or Chalitza at all. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Akiva's case of Sris Adam is Kigon Shenasa Achiv Giores, the deceased brother, who's obviously the brother of the Choletz, had married a Giores. And the Isha that's Kuka L'Chalitza, that requires Chalitza, is a Giores. Rabbi Akiva Savalok, Rabbi Yossi, Yomar, Ger, Kahal Gerim Lo Ikri Kol, which means that there's no Isra Lo Yova Psua Daka, Bekal Hashem, with regard to a Gerim. So if the Sris Chama, if the Sris Adam, married a Giores, then there'd be a Chi of Chalitza. Yihachi Fek Gemara, Yibube Nami Miyabe. Why did Rabbi Akiva say that Cholet? Why didn't Rabbi Akiva say Miyabe? Because there was no Isser here whatsoever. Nothing was violated because the marriage was a perfectly good marriage between the deceased Sris Adam and the Giores. And the Gemara says, Einochinami, this is really true. Rabbi Akiva, in this case, would certainly allow for Yibum, but Aidi, the Omer Rabbi Yeshua Choletz, since Rabbi Yeshua, who happens to hold Kal Gerim Ikri Kolam, Suadak is also Begiores, and therefore he excludes Yibum and requires Chalitza, because Chayve Lavma not upgraded to the status of Chayve Krisus according to Rabbi Yeshua. Omar Iunami Choletz. Rabbi Akiva also used the word Choletz, but really, in truth, Rabbi Akiva would hold Yibum Yavayavne. And the Gemara now proves this answer. Daika Nami. We have a diuk from the language of Rabbi Akiva Choletz that he doesn't mean B'dafka Choletz to exclude Yibum. Diktani, in the next part of the Mishnah, it says, Hey, Rabbi Yeshua ben Beseira al ben Megusas Shahoya b'Yerushalayim vehu Sris Adam v'yibmu es ishto l'kayim divrei Rabbi Akiva. And they, when he died, they would miyabim his wife in order to strengthen the halacha like Rabbi Akiva. And again, even though Rabbi Akiva used the word choltin, but nevertheless, he meant Yibum as well, Chmamina, and we see from the story that when Rabbi Akiva used the word choltin, he doesn't mean to the exclusion of Miyabim, of Yibum, but rather he used Choletz only the Omer of Yeshua Choletz. Masiv Rab is going to now raise a stira from a brisa that seems to indicate that according to Rabbi Akiva, there's an Iser Bia, Patua Daka, Ukrus Shavcha, Bis Adam, Zaken, O Choltin, O Miyabne. And the Bryce explains, Eitzad. Mesu, if the Ptuadaka or the Krishofka or the Srischama or the Saris or the Zaken, again, keep in mind we're talking about a Saris Ad, is if they died and they didn't leave any children, is in Vilahem Nosh, and there are wives that is Krukos Leim Chalitza, Vilahem Achim, and there are potentially Yevamim, Vi Omdu Achim, Vi Asu Maimer Shosea. So the brothers did Kiddusha Kesef, Kiddusha Shtar, for the wives of the deceased. Did Nosnu get Oshacholzu, and also if the Achim gave the wives a get or Chalitza, Masha also Osli, meaning Masem Kayom, their actions are valid, like in any of the other Yevamot. That if there was a mimer, she needs a get, the mamoro, ve'im nosan get, asurli b'yimo. Ve'im bolu, if they miyabim, kanu. The key is chal, the pot for chalitza. Mesu achim, the brothers of the Ptuadak or the Krushivcha, the Swiss Adam or the Zaken died, and the wife falls for Yibum in front of a Ptuadaka. So Mesu Ha'achim, so one of the brothers of, for example, the Ptuadaka died, his wife falls for even to a Ptuadaka or any of the others that we mentioned before, the Amdu Haim, and any one of them, Ptuadaka, Krushavcha, the Swiss Honor, the Zakin, Asu Maimer bin Shoseyem, Vinaslu Get, O Cholzu, Masha Asa Asui, Vimbalu, Kanu, the also lekaimon mishum shenemer liyovo ptuadaka krushavcha b'galashem. Now this brisa reflects the shita of Rabbi Akiva, because the brisa says that it's Adam cholitz. That's Rabbi Akiva, who holds that hoisalo shas hakosher, therefore cholitz. Alma, we see here clearly that according to Rabbi Akiva, b'kol askinon, we're talking about a woman who is also to have a marriage relationship with a Ptuadaka, and that's because the Ptuadaka is excluded from the call. And the Bryce says explicitly, Ptuadaka b'kal Hashem. So we see against Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami said that the words of Rabbi Akiva only apply to Nisue Giores, who is Muteres with Ptuadaka. And here we see that, just 1 second, which was a, this against the answer of Rabbi Ami, because we're not talking about here Nisue Gioris. So again, then we're going to have to come back and ask the same old kasha. Why does Rabbi Akiva say Sris Choletz? There's no Chovas Yibum at all in the case of Ptuadaka, because that which Rabbi Akiva said that Ptuadaka is chayiv when he dies, his brother is chayiv v'yibum kigon shenafla lo shenafla, and at that point she was Machayav Yibum. He was not yet a Ptuadaka, but Sof, after she fell for Yibum, Nifta, he had that injury. And Rabbi Kiva holds that since the Isa Bir Bakal is foul, after she already fell for Yibum, Therefore, shuv lo nifkas chovas nachalitza. Amalei Abai says to Rabbah, even if the Iser Tua Daka is Chal after she fell for Yibum, Yesh Zikal Mafreya. The Lese Iser Ptua V'nitche Ese Dibum. The Iser of Ptua Daka, which came later after the field for Yibum, should be Docha the essay of Yibum. Milosnan, don't we have in a Mishnah later on in Kuftes that if there are two brothers married to two sisters, one is a Ketana, whose Nesuin is only Darbana, the other is a Gedola, her Nesuin is Nesuin Doraisa, and the Bala Gedola dies, Gedoli Yachos Ishto Shalabiyabim, by virtue of the Nesui Ketana. And Rav Gamliel Omer, Miyana, if she was Mama Enes in the Nesuin Miyana, and she's not his wife, and therefore he's allowed to be Miyabim the Gedola, who's no longer Achos Ishto. But if she doesn't give Miyah, Tamtin Ad Shetagbil, we'll wait until this Ketana becomes a Gedola, and she wasn't Mama Enes, and now the Nesui Ketana become Nesuin Doraisa, V'teitze Halazu, and the Gedola now completely is removed from the entire Parsha of Yibum. Mishum Achos Isha. Alma, we see that Osi Yisra Achos Isha V'dochi, even though the Yisra Achos Isha came into being after there was already a Zika Doraisa, because before this girl, a Ketana, became a Gdola, she wasn't Nesualo, V'haisa Gdola Chayeves B'Yivim HaTorah, V'dochi, and yet we're going to be Docha the Zika and the Chovas Yibum, because the Gdola is Yotzes below Yibum V'chalitzas. Hachinami, the same thing we're going to apply here. If he becomes a Ptuadaka after the Zika is Chal, Nese Isa Ptuadaka, V'nitche, and should overrule the Chiv of the Yevamot to be Miyabim, his brother's wife, even though that Zika was already Chal. So now the Gemara brings Rav Yosef as an attempt to answer up Rabbi Akiva. El Amar Rav Yosef, Hai Tana. The Tana of Mishnah, who says that Rabbi Akiva holds Pudaka is Zokek Li Yivum. Ach Tana de Bei Rabbi Akiva. This is the Tana who holds like Rabbi Akiva. The Omar Chayvi Lavin de She'er Havimam. So Chayvi Lavin de Grady Lo Havimam. So only Chayvi Lavin Machmas Kurva. Like, for example, a Nusas Aviv is there, the din is that the Vlad is a mamzer, just like Zera that comes from a Bias Chayve Krisus, and there's no Tfisas Kedushin, therefore there's no Chiv Yibu. But Mevios Chayve Lavim Grede, if they are Chayve Lavim that are not Machmas Kurva, like for example the Yisub Tzuadaka, is Lo Havi Mamzer. There's its Tfisas Kedushin that generate a Chiv Yibum, and therefore a Mishnah says that the Tana of Rabbi Akiva holds up Tzuadakas Mechayvesh Achim Bechalitza, even though the injury took place before the Nafil of the Yibum. So the Gemara asks on Rabbi Akiva if Sris Adam is Choletz, even though he had a Shasak kosher, when he could have children, since now he's not able to procreate, is Ikri Khan should we say that we have now fulfilled the pasuk with regard to mitzvahs yibum lahakim li'achiv shem v'lavar hachiv? So this Sris Chama is not subject to the mitzvah of Yibum, because he's a Labar Hach. He cannot fulfill the mitzvah of Lahakim Li'achiv Shem. So if that be the case, in fact, the Gemara, why is the Sris Adam Cholitz? And Gemara answers, Amar Rava, we're going to prove from this that even someone who's not Roy Laholit now is not exonerated from his chiyuv of Lahakim Li'achiv Shem. He had a shasa kosher laholit, and then he became a Swiss Adam. He had an accident. So if you're going to say that since now he's not Roy Laholit, therefore he's a Swiss, a Saris from Shah Rishona, Mtena Encha Isha Shekshir Liyava. Shlo Nasa Bala Swiss Chama Shachas Kodul Misasa. And it means that there's not going to be any mitzvah of Yibum, because there's no woman alive that fits the following profile. Shlo Nasa Bala Swiss Chama Shachas Kodul Misasa. So there's no such thing as a yavam on the face of the earth that doesn't become a Swiss Chama 1 hour before its death, his death, from the Yisurim, when he's in the throes of death, that weaken him. His whole body is weak. He cannot have children. So no woman will be Skukal Yiva because she's an Ashes Saris. So we see from this that the din of Saris is not determined according to the last minute of time before his death, but rather it all depends on whether he was a Sris who had a Shas HaKosher. He's not Bechlal Sris, Liftar is Ishta B'Yivu. And we're going to derive from this that as far as the Sris, he's not Zokek L'Yivu, and it ain't totally b'matzav shel Shas HaYivu, now the Gemara asks Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that the wife of a Sris Adam is not Skuka Liyibu because ein lo refuah, and if that be the case, Peruka de Rava Pirchahi. The answer of Rava that ein lecha Adam shlo nase balasaris Sris Chama Samak Misaso Pirchahi. It's a kusha. Now, why is it that every Isha is a kukali yavam when the Baal becomes a Saris she'ein lo refuah samach l'ritzat misasa? And therefore, we're forced to conclude that the chiyuv of the yavam is determined by whether or not the Sris had a shasa kosher or didn't have a shasa kosher. So what remains difficult is, why did Rabbi Eliezer speak about Sris Adam Eino Choletz since he had a Shas HaKosher? And the Gemara answers, Hasam Chishusa de Isyaldave. When we said that every person becomes a Sris before his death, that's not called tresis. That's only called chishusa. He's temporarily weak. He had a lot of yisurim during the course of the day. And perhaps even now, the death of his Gabbai is chusha chishusa shal aguf shal yidei yisuri amisa. It's only chishus haguf. It's not srisus. Echidom Yisris Chama that did not have a shas kosher. Amar Yisrael Yosef, Amar Yochanan. And here we turn to that page. He was a sris from his lather. Minoya didn't. How do you know that he was a sris when he was born? Maybe he was born kosher, and then he became a sris, a saris. Amar Abai kol amatil maimivena osa kipa. If when he urinates, it doesn't create an archway, so therefore it doesn't go far. He's a sris chama. The Gemara says, "Mimai dahavi, mimai havi." What made him into this srisus? And the Gemara answers there, and here we'll add a few words to Bisman Shaya Ubar V'mei Imo Afye Ime. His wife was baking the bread in the oven, B'tera, in the afternoon hours. So we now have a tziruf of Choma Yom and Choma Tanur, and together those are two potent factors and forces that create a chimum gadol la'ubar v'sirso, and it caused them to become a saris. And as far as the mother is concerned, the shasya, she drank shichra marka. And what does it mean that shasya shikra marka? Shikra marka is beer that they had to mix, to perhaps dilute it. Amar of Yosef, when he heard the words of Abaye, he declared, Hainu deshmanod li'ami. Now I understand what Rabbi Ami was saying. The Omar kol shemimei imo lokui v'lo yadana ma'ininu. So these are some of the causes of srisus. Category asks, so an Esha sris, in the case of a sris, we lay the p'tur michalitza, according to Rabbi Akiva, the lecha shemehivri beintayim. Okay, originally he was eno ose kipa. So he had a cheskas sris. But lecha shemehivri hasris misiruso beintayim, in the meantime. So now he's not roy laholid shah achas. He was roy laholid shah achas. And now, even though he again became a saris, we're assuming that at Shas HaKosher he was roy laholid, and Rabbi Akiva would be mechayev his wife bisafek chalitza. So why don't we have this chash that the saris became a bari, and that will require chalitza bisafek? The Gemara answers, "Keva desilaso v'sofa lakui lo chashina." We aren't choshesh that at the time of the leda of his birth, and sofo, now when it's lakui, is lo chashina shebein time nasa bari. Mosiv Rav Mori from a Mishnah in Bikuri with regard to the mumim of a Bechor Behema. And the Mishnah goes on to delineate different kinds of phenomenon, like, for example, Tipim Levanim. And we know that for 80 days, they would check. And if during the 80 days they didn't find any sort of mum, then she goes out free. But if they find a mum, that's called a mum kavua. And the Mishnah explains, how do we know that this, what's called charvad, was with him all these days? Rabbi Chanina ben Tignan Somer, both can also we have to check him out minimum 3 times during the period of the Zman. So we need 3 checkings within 80 days. All 3 checkings, if Nira also mum, they see the exact same mum, that's called a mum kavua. And in Bodku Asabachar Pachos Meosam Sheish Kolshpamim, if they check out the Bachar, and if they find that 3 Vidikos, he always had the same manifestation, the same mum, that's a mum kavua. And if Badku as a Bachar, Pachos Meosam Sholosh Piyamim, Manuchoshim Lomar Shema Mumo Eno Kavua. So the mum was with him at the beginning, and then he became, he was healed of the mum. And this is the mum that he has now. It's a brand new mum. So why is it that the Saris, we're not Choshesh, that the Srisus was maybe at the beginning, but then he was Misrape, and then he went back to being a Saris? The Gemara says, Lachad, Aver Chayshinon, Legufe, Lekule Gufe, Lo Chayshin. So when he got hit in one Aver, we are Choshesh that even if he would get this, he would get a refuah, he would go back and be nifkam again. Therefore, Bechar, who was not nivdak his seder abdikos, were afraid that this charvrad inside his eye is not kavua. Avalakule gufa lo chayshina. So if the begam was on anywhere in his goof, and srisus mileda would also be part of his goof, and a result of the choli of all the goof, lo chayshina, we're not afraid that maybe nisrape and chazav v'nifka. So therefore, with regard to sris, if we're dealing with a sris mileda, that we're not choshesh for the refuah and chazav v'nistaris. Okay, then this is where we'll stop, and we'll pick it up here on Daf Pei in the next sheet.